The baby had been screaming for 10 minutes straight. The front door had been wide open the whole time. And the nanny had been on her knees in the middle of that cold marble floor, holding a photograph with both hands, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. The billionaire had been standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at her, completely frozen. He had never seen a grown woman break like that. Not like this. Not like something deep inside her had just cracked open, and everything she had spent 3 years holding together came pouring out all at once on his floor. He took one step down the stairs. She looked up at him, and the look on her face stopped him cold. It was not sadness. It was not guilt. It was the look of a woman who had just found out that everything she had lost, everything she had mourned, everything she had cried herself to sleep over for 3 years straight, had been alive and breathing and sleeping under his roof the entire time. He did not know that yet, but he was about to find out. And nothing in his life, not clawing his way up from nothing, not losing his wife, not learning how to raise a baby completely alone, nothing had prepared him for what was coming. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe right now because this is only the beginning. Share this with someone who needs a story that will absolutely wreck them. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think she should tell him the truth? Now we are going back in. Her name was Ada. She was 29 years old. She had $11 in her bank account, a cracked phone screen held together with clear tape, and a one-bedroom apartment so small that her kitchen table doubled as her only desk. She was the kind of woman America was full of but rarely talked about. The kind who woke up before sunrise, worked until her feet throbbed, smiled at strangers all day long, then came home and cried so quietly at night that her neighbors never heard a single thing. 3 years before any of this happened, Ada had everything she needed to feel complete. Not wealthy, not powerful, just complete. She had a baby girl. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Born on a Tuesday morning in a Chicago hospital with a broken heating system and fluorescent lights that flickered every few minutes like they could not quite make up their mind. Ada had been completely alone in that delivery room. No husband, no mother, no one coming through that door for her. Just a nurse named Carol who held her hand to the worst of it and told her she was doing great even during the moments Ada was absolutely certain she was not going to survive. When it was finally over and they placed that baby on her chest, Ada stopped breathing for just a moment, not from fear, from something she had never felt before in her entire life. She looked down at that tiny face, and something in her chest permanently shifted. She did not have money. She did not have a big house. She did not have anyone riding in to save them, but she had everything that baby needed, because she was hers, and that baby was hers, and she made a quiet, fierce promise right there under those flickering lights that nothing in this world was ever going to change that. She named her Grace. 6 hours later, Ada woke up, and Grace was gone. Not gone the way babies go when nurses take them for routine checks. Gone the way things go when someone takes them on purpose. The bassinet beside her bed was completely empty. The nurse on duty that night had no record of moving her anywhere. The hospital went into the kind of quiet panic that institutions go into when they're terrified of what they have allowed to happen on their watch. They searched every single floor. They checked every single room. They pulled security footage and watched it for 4 straight hours. And what they found on that footage made the hospital director close his office door, sit completely still for a long moment, and then pick up the phone with a hand that was not entirely steady. A woman had walked out of that hospital at 2 in the morning. She had been carrying a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, the same yellow blanket Ada had brought from home and tucked into that bassinet herself the night before. The woman on that footage was composed. Expensive coat, hair perfect even at 2 in the morning. She moved with the kind of confidence that belonged to someone who had never in their life been told no and fully believed they never would be. She walked straight past the security desk without slowing down, past the front reception without a glance, through the automatic doors like she owned the building and everything inside it, and she stepped into a black car that had been sitting outside with the engine already running. The police came within the hour. Ada sat upright in that hospital bed with empty arms and answered every single question they asked her. She described the yellow blanket in detail. She described the small crescent moon birthmark on Grace's left ankle. She described the specific sound Grace made when she cried. This particular sound like a question, like that baby was urgently asking something important every single time she opened her mouth. The detective wrote everything down carefully. He told Ada they were going to find her daughter. He said it with the kind of practice calm that detectives use when they are not entirely sure they are telling the truth. Ada looked at him and said, "Please." Just that one word. Please. The investigation lasted 14 months. 14 months of Ada sitting by her phone. 14 months of following up on tips that went nowhere. 14 months of printing flyers and posting them in neighborhoods where nobody had seen anything. 14 months of walking into police stations and being told the case was still open while watching the energy around it slowly die. Then one morning a detective called her and told her they had identified the woman on the footage. Her name had been Margaret Calloway, wife of one of the most powerful men in Chicago, and she had died 8 months earlier from a sudden illness before they could ever bring her in for questioning. Ada sat with that information for a very long time. The woman who took her daughter was dead. The trail had gone cold. And officially the case went into a file drawer where it would sit and collect dust while Ada's life slowly fell apart around her. She lost her apartment 4 months after that call. She lost her waitressing job 2 months after that when she stopped being able to hold herself together long enough to get through a full shift without breaking down in the back. She spent 3 weeks sleeping on her friend's couch before her friend's husband told her gently, but clearly that it was time. Ada packed everything she owned into one bag and sat on the steps outside that building at 6 in the morning, not entirely sure what came next. What came next was a job listing. She found it on her cracked phone screen while sitting on those steps. A private household in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago was looking for a full-time live-in nanny. The pay was more than she had ever earned in her life. The listing said the position required someone patient, trustworthy, and genuinely devoted to children. It said the child in question was a baby girl, 11 months old. Ada stared at that listing for a long time. Then she applied, not because she thought she would get it. She applied because she needed to eat and she needed a roof, and because some quiet part of her that she could not fully explain felt an unexplainable pull toward those words. Baby girl, 11 months old. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she was being practical. She got the interview 3 days later. The address it gave her was in a part of Chicago where the buildings had doormen, and the streets were clean in a way that felt deliberate. She showed up wearing the only blazer she owned, the one with the small burn mark on the left sleeve that she had positioned carefully against her side. The person who opened the door was not the billionaire. It was a household manager named Mrs. Okafor, a composed woman in her 60s who looked Ada up and down once with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times and then stepped aside to let her in. The house was not what Ada had expected. She had expected cold. She had expected the kind of perfection that felt like a warning, everything in its exact place. Nothing human allowed. But the house felt tired. There were dishes in the sink. There was a baby monitor on the kitchen counter with a small crack along one side. There were dark circles under Mrs. Okafor's eyes that told Ada this household had not slept properly in a long time. Mrs. Okafor asked her the standard questions. Ada answered them honestly. Then Mrs. Okafor asked her why she wanted to work with children specifically. Ada was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she believed every child deserved someone in their corner who would show up for them completely regardless of what was going on around them. Mrs. Okafor looked at her for a beat longer than the question required. Then she wrote something down and told Ada she would be in touch. Ada got the job 2 days later. She moved into the small room off the kitchen that same weekend. She met the baby on her first morning. Mrs. Okafor carried her in from a nursery and placed her on the playmat in the living room and stepped back. Ada crouched down slowly. The baby looked up at her, and Ada's entire body went still. It was not anything she could have explained to another person. It was a feeling that moved through her like electricity, like recognition, like something in her body knew something her mind was not ready to process yet. The baby had the brightest eyes, and on her left ankle, just visible above the edge of her tiny sock, was a small mark, shaped like a crescent moon. Ada did not move for a full 10 seconds. Then she picked the baby up slowly and held her, and the baby did not cry. She made a sound, a specific sound, like a question. Ada stood in that living room holding that baby and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She did not say anything to anyone that day. She put the baby down when it was time. She went to her small room that night and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed both hands flat against her knees and breathed. She told herself she was seeing things. She told herself grief did that to people. She told herself she had to be absolutely certain before she said a single word to anyone. She told herself a lot of things that night, but she did not sleep, not even for an hour. She had been in that house for 3 days before she met the billionaire. His name was Marcus Calloway. He was 38 years old. He had built his company from a single room in a shared office space when he was 22 and turned it into something that appeared in financial magazines and made other powerful men slightly nervous in rooms. He was the kind of man who filled a space without trying. Not loud, not showy, just present in a way that made everything around him feel like it was responding to him rather than the other way around. Ada met him at 6:30 in the morning when she came into the kitchen to prepare the baby's bottle and found him already standing at the counter with a coffee cup in his hand, staring at absolutely nothing. He had not heard her come in. She cleared her throat softly. He turned around, and for a moment they both just stood there in that early morning kitchen while the baby monitor on the counter crackled softly between them. He introduced himself. She introduced herself. He thanked her for taking the position. He said it in the voice of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and was cautiously allowing someone else to help hold one small corner of it. Ada told him she was glad to be there. He nodded once and took his coffee and left the kitchen. That was the beginning. The first 2 weeks Ada moved through that house carefully. She did her job with everything she had. She fed the baby on schedule. She sang to her during bath time. She learned every sound the baby made and what each one meant. She learned that the baby laughed hardest when you made a particular face, this wide, surprised expression that Ada discovered completely by accident one morning and then kept making over and over just to hear that laugh. She was devoted in the way that she had promised herself she would be devoted to a child that was in her care. But underneath every single moment of those 2 weeks was something else, something she had not told anyone, because she had been watching. She had been paying attention to every detail of that baby that she could observe without drawing suspicion. The birthmark, the cry, the way the baby's hands moved when she was excited, the specific flutter, both fists opening and closing rapidly like little wings. Grace had done that from the very first day. Ada had told the detective about it. She had described it in the report. She had never told another living soul about it because it was hers. It was the private, specific language of her daughter that she kept in the most protected part of herself. This baby did it too. On the 14th day, Ada sat in her small room after the baby was asleep and made a decision. She was not going to say anything yet. She was not going to accuse anyone. She was not going to blow up this child's entire world on the basis of a birthmark and a feeling that lived in her chest like a lit match. She was going to find proof, real proof, the kind that could not be argued with. And until she had it, she was going to do her job and protect that little girl with everything she had. What Ada did not account for, what she had absolutely no framework for, was Marcus. She had expected him to be distant. She had expected the kind of wealthy grief that expressed itself as coldness, as efficiency, as keeping everything at arm's length because feeling things was expensive and he had already paid too much. He was not that. Marcus Calloway was a man who had been broken open by loss and had not fully figured out how to close back up again. He forgot to eat. Ada started leaving a plate on the counter near his office at noon without saying anything about it. He worked until 2 in the morning 3 nights a week. She would find him asleep on the couch, sometimes when she came down for the baby's early feed, still in his work clothes, laptop open on his chest. She started leaving a glass of water on the table beside the couch without being asked. He noticed. He did not comment on it for the first week. Then one morning he came into the kitchen while she was feeding the baby breakfast, and he said quietly that he appreciated the small things she had been doing. He said it like it cost him something to say it. Ada looked up from the baby and said it was no trouble at all. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the two of them at the kitchen table. This woman, he barely knew feeding his daughter, with the focused tenderness of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He said she was very good with her. Ada looked down at the baby who had grabbed her finger and was holding on with surprising grip strength. She said she just tried to pay attention to what the baby needed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that was all anyone could ever really do, and he left for work. Ada sat at that table for a long time after he left. She was not supposed to feel anything about this man. She was here for one reason, and one reason only. She had to keep reminding herself of that. A month into the job, Ada found the study unlocked for the first time. Marcus had been in there the night before and must have forgotten to pull the door fully shut. She was not a woman who went through other people's things. She stood in that hallway for a long moment before she stepped inside. She was not looking for anything personal. She was looking for anything that connected his late wife to the night Grace disappeared. The study was orderly. Bookshelves along one wall. A large desk with clean lines. Filing cabinets along the back. And on the corner of the desk, facing the chair, a silver-framed photograph. Ada picked it up. It was Marcus and his wife on what looked like a vacation somewhere warm. She was laughing at something off camera. She looked like someone who had never experienced a consequence in her life. She looked like the woman on that security footage. Ada put the photograph down very carefully. Her hands were not entirely steady. She left the study exactly as she had found it, and went upstairs and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands flat on her knees the way she always did when she needed to hold herself together. She was not going to fall apart. Not yet. She had been right. She had known she was right for weeks now. But seeing that face in a photograph in full light made it real in a way that the slow gathering of evidence had not quite done. His wife had taken Grace. His wife had walked into that hospital at 2 a.m. and taken her daughter. And somewhere in this house was the proof. She needed to prove it. She just had to find it without destroying everything first. The problem was that finding it was taking longer than she had planned. And every single day she stayed in that house, something she had not planned for was getting harder to ignore. She was starting to care about Marcus Calloway. Not in the way she had warned herself against. Not romantically. Not yet. Just in the way you start to care about someone when you watch them try. She watched him try every single day. He came home from work and changed out his suit and sat on the floor with the baby and tried. He read the same board book 12 times in a row because the baby kept slapping it and laughing. He called Mrs. Okafor at 10 at night to ask if it was normal that the baby had sneezed 3 times in a row. He left a voice message for his pediatrician at midnight that Mrs. Okafor played for Ada the next morning with a small, tired smile, in which Marcus described the sneeze pattern in significant detail. He was not a perfect father. He was sometimes distracted. He sometimes came home so emptied out by whatever the day had taken from him that he could barely hold a conversation. But he showed up. Every single day he showed up for that little girl. And Ada sat with the weight of what she knew and what she had not yet said, and felt the ground beneath her getting more complicated by the day. 6 weeks in, the baby got sick. Nothing serious. A fever that climbed to 102 on a Thursday night and turned the whole house into a quiet emergency. Ada had been awake since midnight. She had given the baby the medicine the doctor prescribed on the phone. She had changed her twice. She had rocked her for so long that her own arms ached. Marcus had come home at 11 that night, earlier than usual, and when Mrs. Okafor met him at the door and told him the baby had a fever, he had gone straight upstairs without taking his coat off. He found Ada in the rocking chair with the baby against her chest. He stood in the doorway of that nursery in his coat, still holding his keys. Ada looked up at him. She said the fever was coming down. She said the baby had finally stopped crying about 20 minutes ago. She said she thought the worst of it had passed. He crossed the room and crouched down beside the rocking chair and put his hand against the baby's forehead. His hand was right next to Ada's hand on the baby's back. Neither of them moved for a moment. He exhaled slowly. He said, "Thank you." Not the casual thank you of an employer to an employee. The thank you of someone who had been terrified and was now, because of another person, slightly less terrified. Ada looked at him crouched there beside her in his coat in the dim light of that nursery and felt something shift in her chest that she absolutely could not afford to feel. She looked back down at the baby. She said, "Of course." He stayed. He pulled the small ottoman from the corner and sat beside the rocking chair and they both stayed in that nursery together until the baby's breathing evened out completely, and the fever broke just before 3 in the morning. They did not talk much, but the silence was the kind that builds something rather than the kind that takes something away. When Ada finally laid the baby down in the crib and turned around, Marcus was still there, half asleep on the ottoman, coat still on. She stood and looked at him for a moment. Then she took the folded blanket from the back of the chair and put it over him and turned off the light and went to her room. She sat on her bed in the dark. She was in serious trouble. Not the danger kind. The other kind. The kind that sneaks up on you while you are busy surviving and plants itself so deep that by the time you notice it, you cannot imagine pulling out without taking something vital with it. She had not planned for this. She had not planned for any of this. She had come into this house to find the truth about her daughter. She had not come here to feel things about the man whose wife had taken her. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. She breathed. She told herself she would find the proof. She told herself she would tell him everything when she had it. She told herself that whatever she was feeling was secondary to what that little girl deserved to know about where she came from. She believed all of that. She also knew that none of it made what she was feeling any smaller. 2 months into the job, Marcus started talking to her. Really talking. Not employer to employee. Not the professional courtesy of a man who appreciated that his household ran smoothly. He started talking to her the way people talk when they have gone too long, without talking to anyone who actually listens. It started small. He mentioned something about work one evening while she was washing the baby's bottles at the sink, and he was standing at the counter, not quite ready to go upstairs yet. She responded. He said something else. She responded again. An hour later, they were still standing in that kitchen, and he had told her about the company he built and the partner who had betrayed him early on, and the years he had spent not entirely sure he was going to make it. Ada stood at that sink and listened. She asked a question here and there. Not because she was performing interest, because she was genuinely interested in the way you are genuinely interested in a person who turns out to be far more than the shape of them you had decided on in advance. He stopped talking at some point and seemed to notice how much time had passed. He looked slightly embarrassed. He said he was sorry for going on like that. Ada dried her hands on the dish towel and said he did not need to apologize for talking. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said that his wife had not been a good listener. He said it plainly, without bitterness, in the voice of someone simply stating a fact they had made peace with. Ada looked at him. She said she was sorry. He said he was not sure he was. Then he seemed to catch himself and said goodnight and went upstairs. Ada stood alone in that kitchen for a long time. She was building feelings for the husband of the woman who stole her daughter. She understood fully how impossible that was. It did not make the feelings smaller. 3 months, and Ada found what she had been looking for. She had not been snooping. She had been searching for the baby's extra blankets in the storage room off the hallway, a room she had been given full access to as part of managing the nursery supplies. On the top shelf behind a stack of storage boxes was a small fireproof lockbox. It was not locked. Ada stood on the step stool and looked at it for a long moment. She opened it. Inside was a single manila envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 things. Hospital records from a private clinic in Ohio dated 3 years ago documenting a failed pregnancy, a private investigator's report with Ada's name on the cover page, and a photograph of Ada leaving the Chicago hospital the night she had given birth, taken from a distance, with a timestamp at the bottom that read 8:47 in the evening. Ada sat down on the floor of that storage room. She sat there for 20 minutes. His wife had planned it. She had lost a pregnancy, and she had found Ada, and she had planned the entire thing months in advance. This was not a woman who had done something in a moment of desperation. This was cold and deliberate and thorough. Ada had been chosen. Her daughter had been chosen. And the man upstairs had no idea any of it had ever happened. She put everything back exactly as she found it. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed. She thought about what happened next. She could go to the police right now. She had the lockbox. She had the evidence. She could walk out of this house tonight and take it all with her and let the legal system do the rest. But there was a baby asleep down the hall who had known only one home her entire life. There was a man in this house who had spent 3 years grieving a woman who had done something unforgivable. And there was Ada, who loved that little girl with everything she had, not just because she was hers, but because she had held her and fed her and sung to her and watched her grow for 3 months and would have given anything on earth to protect her from pain. She did not go to the police that night. She stayed. She needed to think. She needed to figure out how to do this in a way that did not detonate everyone's life without warning. She needed, if she was honest with herself, a little more time. What she did not know was that Marcus had already started to suspect something. Not about Grace, not about his wife, about Ada. He had noticed things, small things that individually meant nothing, but together formed a pattern that a man as observant as Marcus Calloway could not fully ignore. The way she held the baby sometimes, pressing her cheek against the top of her head, closing her eyes, breathing her in. The way she sometimes stopped in the middle of something ordinary and looked at the baby with an expression that was too large for the moment. The way she had reacted the very first time he had mentioned his wife's name in passing. This small, almost imperceptible stillness that moved through her body like a current before she returned to normal. He had told himself he was imagining things. He had told himself he was projecting his own grief onto a woman who was just very good at her job. He had told himself a lot of things. But Marcus was a man who had built an empire on his ability to read a room accurately. And something in this room had been telling him for weeks that there was a layer to Ada he had not reached yet. He just did not know which questions to ask. The moment everything changed happened on a Sunday morning 4 months in. Ada had been giving the baby a bath. Marcus had been home, one of his rare, completely free mornings, drinking coffee in the kitchen below. He had come upstairs at some point to check on them. He had stood in the doorway of the bathroom watching Ada lift the baby out of the water and wrap her in a yellow towel, this particular yellow towel that Ada had brought from her own bag on the first day and that she used every single bath time without fail. He had not thought about the towel before, but something about it on this particular morning made him look at it more carefully. It was yellow, a specific shade of yellow, worn soft from washing, with a small white duck embroidered in the corner that was starting to fade. He had seen that towel before. Not here, in a photograph. He went downstairs slowly and sat at the kitchen table and tried to locate where the photograph was stored. It had been in the file the detective gave him 14 months ago. The file he had put in the safe in his study and not opened since. He went to the safe. He took out the file. He found the photograph. It was a photograph of the items found in the hospital room after Ada's baby was reported missing. A yellow blanket, a yellow towel with a white duck in the corner, a small handwritten note tucked inside the bassinet that said, "Welcome to the world, my whole heart." Marcus sat at his desk with that photograph in his hand. He sat there for a very long time. Then he stood up and walked to the door of the study and stood in the hallway and listened to Ada in the kitchen below, talking softly to the baby, making her laugh. The baby making that sound she always made, that specific sound like a question. He went back to his desk. He opened his laptop. He made a call to the private detective he had used for the company 3 years ago. He kept his voice very steady. He asked him to run a DNA comparison. He explained what he needed. He said he needed it done quietly and quickly. Then he hung up and sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Downstairs, Ada was feeding the baby lunch. She was singing softly, this quiet song she sang every mealtime, something she had made up herself. Simple words about simple things, the kind of song that was not meant for anyone but the person it was sung to. She had no idea that 2 floors above her the ground had just shifted. She had no idea that the careful plan she had been building for 4 months had just been outpaced. She had no idea that the man she was falling in love with was now looking for the same truth she had been carrying alone since the day she walked through his front door. The DNA results came back in 9 days. Marcus opened the email at his office at 7 in the morning before anyone else arrived. He read it once. He closed the laptop. He sat in his empty office for 40 minutes. Then he drove home. Ada was in the kitchen when he walked in. The baby was on the playmat in the living room. Ada looked up when she heard the door and read his face immediately and put down what she was holding. She knew that he knew. She had known this moment was coming. She had played it out in her head 100 different times. Every version of it she had imagined began with her telling him. She had not imagined this version, the version where he walked through the door already holding the answer. He stood in the kitchen doorway. She stood by the counter. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then he said her name. Just her name. The way you say a person's name when you've been carrying a question about them that was too large to fit into any other word. Ada looked at him. She said she was sorry. He said he needed her to tell him everything. She told him everything. All of it. From the beginning. From that Tuesday morning in the hospital with the flickering lights. From the empty bassinet. From the 14 months of searching. From the morning she saw the job listing on her cracked phone screen sitting on those steps. From the first moment she held the baby and felt that lightning recognition move through her entire body. From the birthmark. From the sound. From the yellow towel she had brought from her own bag, because she could not bring herself to leave it behind. From the lockbox in the storage room. From every single day of the 4 months she had spent in this house, knowing the truth and waiting for the courage to do something with it. She talked for a long time. Marcus listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not move. When she finished, there was a silence in that kitchen that was unlike any silence Ada had ever sat inside. Then Marcus put both hands flat on the counter and dropped his head and breathed. He stayed like that for a long time. When he looked up, his face was something Ada did not have a word for. It was not anger. It was not at her. It was the face of a man who had loved someone for years and was only now, standing in his own kitchen, finding out exactly who that person had been. He said his wife had told him she was pregnant 3 years ago. He said she had lost a baby at 5 months. He said he had held her while she cried. He said he had mourned that baby with her. He said 8 months after that she had come home one evening and told him she had decided to pursue private adoption and that she had already begun the process and that she needed him to trust her to handle it. He had trusted her. He had not asked many questions because she had just lost a baby and he had not wanted to put anything else on her. He had signed the papers she put in front of him without reading every line because he had trusted her. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. Ada stood very still. He said he had not known. He said it quietly and plainly, and Ada believed him completely, because she had watched this man for 4 months. She had watched him try to be good every single day. She had watched him grieve. She had watched him be gentle with a baby he had no template for loving, because everything had happened so fast, and the person who was supposed to help him figure out had died before he was ready. She believed he had not known. She had believed it long before this moment. It was part of why she had stayed. They stood in that kitchen for a long time. The baby made a sound from the living room. That sound, like a question. They both turned toward it. Then they looked back at each other. And something passed between them in that look that neither of them could have named out loud, but that both of them felt completely. The coming months were not simple. Ada's lawyer filed the necessary paperwork. Marcus did not fight it. He cooperated with everything. He gave the detective the lockbox. He gave his own attorney instructions to make the process as smooth as possible for Ada. He did not do it because he was legally required to. He did it because he sat with his daughter one evening after everything came out and looked at her and understood fully for the first time what it meant that this little girl had a mother who had spent 3 years looking for her. He did it because he was, underneath everything, a man who believed in doing right by people even when it cost him something. It cost him a great deal. It cost him his picture of his marriage. It cost him the grief he had carried for his wife, which now had nowhere clean to land. It cost him weeks of sleep and months of a particular loneliness that was different from any loneliness he had felt before, because now he knew that the person he had mourned had not been who he thought she was. Ada did not leave the house immediately. The lawyers recommended a transition period for the baby. Ada moved from the small room off the kitchen to the larger guest room upstairs. She was no longer the nanny. She was the baby's mother, navigating a legal process, living under the same roof as a man whose entire world she had just turned inside out. It should have been impossibly awkward. It was sometimes, but mostly it was something else. They were two people who had been forced by extraordinary circumstances into an extraordinary intimacy, and who had, somewhere along the way, become the realest thing in each other's days. They still talked in the kitchen in the evenings, not like an employer and employee anymore, like two people who had seen each other clearly in a way that most people never get to be seen, and had not looked away. He told her once, about 3 months into the transition, standing at the kitchen counter late at night, that he did not know what to do with everything he felt about his wife now. He said he could not grieve her the same way anymore, but he could not hate her either, because hating her meant dismantling every moment of the last 3 years that he had believed was real. Ada listened. She said she had spent a long time being furious. She said the fury was real and it was earned, and she did not think he had to talk her out of it. But she said she had also spent time in that house watching the baby and watching him, and she thought that whatever his wife had done, this little girl had been loved. She had been held. She had been cared for. She said she did not think love canceled out what happened, but she thought it mattered. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He said she was more generous than he deserved her to be. Ada said she was not being generous. She was being honest. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was easy. Then he looked away. But something had changed. Something that had been building slowly for months had just moved one step closer to the surface. He said her name that evening when she was leaving the kitchen. She turned around. He stood at the counter with both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, and he said that he needed her to know that whatever happened legally, whatever the paperwork said, he was not going to disappear from that little girl's life. He said she deserved to have both of them. He said he did not know exactly what that looked like yet, but he knew he was not walking away. Ada looked at him standing there in that kitchen that she had spent months learning, in that house that had broken her open and put her back together at the same time. She said she knew. He looked at her. She looked at him. And this time neither of them looked away. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no music. There was no grand speech. There were just two people standing in a kitchen at 11 at night who had been through something enormous together, and who both understood in the same quiet moment that they were not done, that whatever came next, they were not done. The legal process concluded 7 months after that conversation in the kitchen. Ada was recognized formally as Grace's mother. That was her name now, spoken out loud in the courtroom, on paper, in the world. Grace. The name Ada had whispered into that empty bassinet 3 years ago the morning she was taken. The name she had said every night before she went to sleep for 3 years, like a prayer she was not sure anyone was listening to. Grace. The judge signed the papers on a Wednesday morning. Ada sat in the courthouse parking lot afterward and cried for a long time. Not the quiet crying she had trained herself to do over 3 years of being alone with it. The other kind. The kind that comes when something you've been holding your breath for so long finally allows you to exhale. Marcus was sitting beside her in the car. He had come. She had not asked him to. He had just shown up at 7 that morning while she was getting dressed and told Mrs. Okafor he would be driving Ada to the courthouse. He sat beside her in that parking lot and did not try to fix it or move it along. He just stayed, the way he always stayed. Ada eventually stopped crying and sat back and looked at the courthouse and then looked at him. He was looking at her already. She said thank you for coming. He said there was nowhere else he would have been. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said his name. He said yes. She said she needed to tell him something. He said okay. She said she had come into his house with one purpose and one purpose only. She said she had told herself every single day for the first 2 months that everything else was secondary. She said she had tried very hard to keep it that way. He said he knew. She said somewhere along the way she had stopped being able to. She said she did not know what to do with that. She said she was not asking him for anything. She said she just needed him to know because she was tired of carrying things alone. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that he had known for a while. He said he had been trying to figure out the right time to say something, and there was never a right time when everything was so complicated. He said he did not think the timing was much better now. He said he also did not think either of them should wait for perfect timing any more, given everything that had happened. Ada looked at him. He looked at her. He said he was not going to pretend he had it all figured out. He said his marriage had turned out to be built on something he did not fully understand. He said he had a lot of things to work through that had nothing to do with her. He said all of that was true. He also said that Ada was the most honest person he had ever been in a room with. He said she had come into his house carrying an impossible weight, and she had still, every single day, shown up for that little girl with everything she had. He said he had watched her choose grace, in every sense of that word, over and over again when no one would have blamed her for choosing something harder and uglier. He said he did not know exactly what came next, but he knew he wanted to figure out with her. Ada sat in the passenger seat of that car outside that courthouse and felt something she had almost forgotten was still possible. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter and more durable than happiness. Something that felt like ground beneath her feet after years of open water. She said okay. He said okay. Neither of them said anything else for a while. Then she said they should go get Grace. He said yes. He started the car, and they drove home. Not to his house. Not to her house. Home, where a little girl was waiting who had no idea yet how far her mother had traveled to find her, or how many impossible things had to happen in exactly the right sequence for her to end up exactly where she was supposed to be. But she would know one day. Ada would tell her. She would tell her the whole story. All of it. From the Tuesday morning in the hospital with the flickering lights, to the $11 and the cracked phone screen, to the job listing that felt like a pull she could not explain, to the first morning she walked into that kitchen and a man she did not know handed her his daughter and said thank you in the voice of someone who had been carrying something alone for too long. She would tell her that sometimes the world takes something from you that has no business being taken. And sometimes, if you are stubborn enough and brave enough and willing to walk into hardest rooms, you find your way back to it. She would tell her that love is not always simple, that it sometimes comes wrapped in complicated things, that the best kind of love is the kind that looks at all of that complication clearly and chooses to stay anyway. She would tell her all of it, but not today. Today, Grace was at home with Mrs. Okafor eating lunch and making that sound she always made, like a question, like she was urgently asking something important. Today, Ada and Marcus were in a car driving toward her, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.